Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first of our webinars. This is a 5-session webinar series all about building user-friendly records management solutions. You'll have seen the titles and the dates of our series in the invite and in our intro screen we were just looking at here. I hope you can join us for all of them. If you can't, don't worry too much. They'll be available on YouTube, on the Habanero Consulting YouTube channel after each session, probably about an hour or an hour and a half after the session. So you can review them, you can send them to your friends, you can look at them on a Friday night, whatever you would like to do. So my name is Rick Martin. I am the ECM practice lead at Habanero Consulting. I will let my co-presenter introduce himself.
Hi everyone, this is Graham Sibley. I'm the founder and CEO at Collabware. I'm responsible for all the product vision, general corporate strategy, and the direction we take for the future.
Okay, so we'll just, before we go on, we'll just give you a really brief introduction to Collabware and to Habanero. I promise this is literally 2 or 3 slides, just so you have a little bit of context as to who we are and what we do.
We work quite closely with Habanero. We've been partners for a number of years now. We've had a wide range of successful implementations, and we're really excited to be here today presenting with Habanero on a topic that we believe quite strongly in. So I'd like to jump in with just a quick explanation of who Collabware is. So many of you on this webinar know, through our previous webinars, who we are and what we do, but just a refresher for some of you who might be new. We provide intelligent enterprise information management and productivity software for the SharePoint platform. Our mantra is that everything is simple, seamless, and transparent, because we want everything that we build to be simple to use, seamlessly integrate with the way you work, and be completely transparent to your end users. As a result of this mantra, we've had success globally and really have become quite well known for delivering on that particular mantra. We have over 100,000 daily users across the world. We operate in 11 different industry verticals, including public sector, which is quite a heavy presence for us. Our software is deployed and utilized in 3 different languages, and we've increased the productivity of users by millions of hours through the use of our compliance and governance capabilities, through the ability to quickly find content that you're looking for and what is needed by your organizational users and by your business processes. There's a little sampling of some of the customers that we work with. A number of these are also Habanero customers and customers that have quite successful implementations and have realized these benefits. And we're really excited that you're here so that you'll be able to take advantage of that as well.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Habanero. So Habanero creates great workplace experiences through technology. So for the purposes of this session today, that technology is a platform like SharePoint, a platform like Collabware CLM, the latest version, CLM 2016. From the perspective of the great workplace experiences, we'll really start to explore what this means as we get into the webinar. So sit tight on if you're wondering about what that great workplace experience looks like. So our agenda today. First of all, we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring what user-friendly records management is all about. Then I'm going to walk through our webinar series, explain each of the subsequent 4 sessions so that you have a good understanding of what we'll be covering in each one. You can decide which ones you'd like to attend, which one you would like your colleagues to attend, and so on and so forth. Then we're going to jump into session 1, that's the vision and roadmap, that's the majority of today's session. And then finally, we will cover off any questions. So if you do have questions, please just submit them through the GoToWebinar question panel. My colleague Spencer Perry will be at the other end of those questions, and we will surface them at the end. If we don't have time, if we run out of time at the end of the webinar, we will respond directly to you if you have any questions that have gone unanswered. So please feel free to submit as many questions as you would like. Okay, so user-friendly records management. Why do we need to care? Maybe another way of saying this is, what could it do for us? User-friendly records management is delivered through the domain of user experience. Habanero actually has a long history of working in the user experience space, both delivering employee portals, intranets, or customer portals, which would be more like a regular website, and actually even collaboration and document management solutions. From our perspective, user experience can impact two things. Firstly, adoption, getting people actually into the solution and getting them using it, and then usage. In this context, what I mean by usage is that people are using the solution correctly, using all of the features and capabilities. A good example of this would be having people accurately classify and declare documents into records each and every time, regardless of tenure, regardless of training, regardless of their experience perhaps. As a side note, I guess I should say as well, having users perform these tasks in terms of the classification and maybe even the declaration does go against other principles that we'll be talking about here today, but I wanted to use that example as a commonly understood example that we can all relate to. So from a user experience perspective, if we can have user experience improve adoption and improve usage, I think it's safe to say that those are two key areas in which a lot of records management solutions struggle. So there are a couple of other reasons why user-friendly records management, or really user-friendly anything, is critical. The first is that whether you like it or not, your digital landscape, your digital workplace is really actually global now. Previously, the main competitors of internal collaboration or records management system were typically internal systems. Could be email, maybe file sharing, maybe the odd desktop. Today, the digital workplace is much, much more complex than that. We've got all these other tools. We've got iPhone apps, we've got Google Docs, instant messaging, we've got Dropbox and Prism and so on. These are all highly usable environments that are very, very easy for your users to light up within your environment. So really, like it or not, your company digital workplace is in competition with a global digital workplace. And that's a crucial point. I heard Jim Fowler, he's the CIO of General Electric, describing some internal research they did recently. He instigated a review of their internet access logs and traffic. It doesn't sound terribly interesting, but they found some interesting stuff. What he figured out was that there was actually a tremendous amount of business data going to third-party solutions. So obviously they're looking at their internet access logs. There's email, there's messaging and all that sort of thing. But actually what they found was there's a tremendous amount of data that should have been managed and contained within the organization going outside of the organization. His realization was that their push to get everyone using these structured systems was actually having the opposite effect. It was driving people away to store their content outside of the company. So his solution to this challenge and his direction to the company CIOs, so General Electric is such a gigantic 350,000 employees, such a big company that this fellow Jim Fowler actually has a team of CIOs working for him. So his edict, his direction to his CIOs was that they either had to embrace these alternate solutions or secondarily make it easier to use the tools that are sanctioned. So in the case of compliance, the notion of using alternate solutions is not really an acceptable option. So really the only option is we have to make it easier to use the tools that are sanctioned. And really that comes back to the user experience. One final idea is that work has changed. The tasks required of people to be successful in their jobs are no longer these sort of routine mechanical tasks. Jobs are now highly creative, they're collaborative, people are mobile and distributed, maybe around the country, maybe even around the planet. We have somebody working in Bangladesh recently within Habanero. It's interesting because these topics of creativity, collaboration, mobile, they're not topics that are confronted within most records management initiatives. And yet these are the people that we're looking to impact as we deploy these records management initiatives. One really fascinating set of data for me is from the US Census Bureau. They've been tracking employment patterns for the last 40 years. They've reported this, you can see here, this blue line. This is a sort of a precipitous drop in what they call routine mechanical occupations. And there's been a corresponding increase in creative, non-routine occupations. So really what this gets at, for me, is that people seldom perform routine mechanical tasks in their jobs. And if, as a collection of records managers or as an industry, we're asking people to perform these routine mechanical tasks, I think we're going to struggle. Okay, so hopefully we've agreed more or less that there's a need for records management to be different, to be user-friendly in order to succeed. So what does this look like? So in our mind, user-friendly records management is delivered through 4 approaches. The first one is to focus on the end user's jobs. Let's focus on supporting the end users instead of focusing on them supporting our records management work. To this end, we also aim to isolate users from records keeping activities. We don't need to make users records managers. That doesn't make sense. The third one, reduce barriers. This definitely isn't specific to records management solutions. This is a much more general idea. Simply be very mindful of the barriers, the hurdles or the obstacles that your employees are facing just to get to the solution. This might be complex passwords, dysfunctional login screens, ugly portals, slow laptops, slow servers, usage policies, anything at all. You might not necessarily be able to address all of these, but just be mindful of them. You want your users to be in a happy state of mind once they get to your records management environment. And finally, and we will discuss this at the end today, you won't get all of this work done overnight or even inside of a few months. Records management initiatives done successfully take time. Be mindful that this is a journey. It'll take a while to finish, and even then, once you're finished, you'll still have to evolve the solution to keep it relevant. So you have to think about that evolution throughout the whole process. You can find out much more about these ideas in another webinar we recorded, Increasing Records Management Compliance. You can access that from our website or from the Habanero Consulting YouTube channel. Okay, so before we jump into the session, and I promise we are going to jump into this, I wanted to paint a bit of a picture of what these user-friendly records management solutions look like. It's actually not rocket science. It's quite simple and really a well-trodden path in other areas of technology. I know that some organizations, maybe even some on the line today who are looking to push further into this space, have records management solutions that are already oriented towards their users. If this is you and your organization, I would really love to hear from you and explore with you your journey to get here. Maybe even see some examples of where you are today. I won't, of course, share any of this, of these details without your permission, but please reach out to me. I'm very curious to find out where we're at as an industry. My contact details are going to be at the end of the deck. Okay, so user-friendly records management. So this is a mock-up of what our records management solutions look like. It's a little bit hard to show real solutions because they invariably either have confidential content in them or they have been developed for a particular client, and as such, we're asked to protect the user experience that we've developed. So this is simply a mock-up. This is a mock-up of our new Habanero ECM platform, which is the starting point for all of our records management and enterprise content management projects. So there's 2 points to note here. The first is that this is a piece of a broader employee portal or an intranet. You certainly don't have to do that, but it makes sense to leverage the same platform, happens to be, in this case, be SharePoint, for your records management environment, as well as your employee portal environment. You can see the navigation along the top: news and events, projects and teams, knowledge library, and so on and so forth. These are much more akin to an employee portal. The second point to note here is that this particular screen is really pivotal within our solutions. It's a search-powered directory of all of the workspaces. As you likely know, these are known as within SharePoint as team sites that exist. Our approach towards information architecture, and we're getting into this in more detail in a subsequent webinar, is not to organize the environment by an organizational unit like a department or even a division. Instead, we aim to leverage other taxonomies that the end user can relate to more strongly and that also won't create informational silos. So the next mock-up here, this is just the second and the final one that we have, is an example of what happens when you drill down into each team site or into each environment. Again, this is a fictitious example, but this is actually something that we have built for another client. This is for a municipality, and the idea is that this is a workspace dedicated to a specific civic address, in this case 123 Main Street. The user simply worries about getting the content in, and the records management solution, in this case Collabware CLM, invisibly classifies it and declares it in the background. The user doesn't need to really know anything about records management or records keeping that they are triggering in the background here. This is our goal. This is where, over today and the next 4 sessions in this webinar series, we will get to. Now I'm just going to touch briefly on our webinar series, talk about today's session and the next 4 sessions, and then we're going to jump into session 1. This is a summary of our sessions. The first one today, vision and roadmap. This is how to develop a good plan for your ECM initiative. This vision and roadmap session will describe how to perform the research, how to engage stakeholders, and ultimately how to develop and communicate that final deliverable, which is of course a roadmap. The next session, this is going to be in 2 weeks from today, February 18th, will be about planning and implementation strategies. So once you've got that roadmap, what do you do next? This session is really about project discipline, really in the form of project management and project planning. The planning implementation strategies is going to help you navigate common gotchas when you're preparing for your records management solution. We have got a bunch of good ideas and tips and tricks that you'll need to consider before you get going. Our experience has been that building momentum in these projects is critical, and the planning and implementation strategy session is really going to allow you to cover off things ahead of the main project that will allow you, when you get going, to build that momentum. The third session is called Building the Foundation. We believe that you should focus on building a common environment upon which you can base your records management solution. If you're aware of Adaptive Path, this is akin to the idea of the cupcake. If you're not aware of Adaptive Path, fear not, we will get there. The fourth session here is what we call Bring It to the Business. This is going to be on March 17th. This is really where you're starting to get your hands dirty in the business and in the business of records management. This is about engaging end users, supporting their goals, and building out solutions using SharePoint and Collabware's CLM 2016 platform. And then finally, our last session, this is March 31st. This will talk you through the things that you need to think about post go live, everything from funding to governance, planning or support models. So as we go through these sessions, or even today, please send me feedback. Send me feedback about what you like, or even what you don't like. Hopefully not too much of the latter. I want to make this session and this whole webinar series as valuable as possible for everybody, to make it worth the investment of your time. So please contact me and let me know what's working for you. Now we're going to just jump into session 1, vision and roadmap. So really, this is all about what's the point? What's the point of our entire records management initiative? And then where are we going to start? So it's worth thinking about why we need vision and roadmap just before we get going here. There's a bunch of different reasons. The first one is the vision and roadmap. If we're doing it correctly, it determines and allows us to communicate exactly how we're going to be impacting our organization. The second idea is that it's a really good tool for driving alignment across your stakeholders. It can be very difficult to align a disparate collection of stakeholders, and the roadmap tool and the roadmap process is a very good way of doing that. Thirdly, once it's done, it's a fantastic communication tool. It gets printed out for us when we do it. It gets printed out very large, 3 foot by 10 or 14 feet even. We print it out, we put it on the wall, and it's a really great way of driving conversation about the initiative. And then finally, you simply can't do it all at once and be successful. So it really helps you plan your program of work, of course. Okay, so how do you build a vision and roadmap? Well, there's 3 phases. The vision and the roadmap are kind of obvious, but the first piece, often overlooked, is all about research. Research. That's really forming the bedrock of the work we're going to be walking through today. So there's a bunch of different research activities that you can do. We're going to walk through all of these in detail. Interviews, we need to, of course, look at the compliance needs. We have this notion of listening labs. It's something that we have a lot of experience in. There's the maybe dreaded content inventory. And then at the end of the whole process, we have a period of considering measurement. So stakeholder interviews. This is actually an activity which it's easier for a consulting company like ourselves to do rather than an internal team. And that's not to say you should hire us, but it is to say that it's an obstacle that you'll have to overcome. It's easier for us to come into an organization and ask slightly dumb questions or slightly maybe obvious questions and get at the heart of the matter. When we're interviewing stakeholders, we have, typically speaking, a set of topics that we discuss with each stakeholder. So for the executives, what we really like to understand is corporate imperatives. What are the big ideas? What are the strategies that the organization is going through? What does the future look like? With project stakeholders, really we want to be talking about project outcomes, opportunities, issues or pains that people are feeling. Bear in mind, of course, that you are likely one of these project stakeholders if you're doing this internally. We also find it's really helpful to talk to end users, especially if you have a records management solution in place today. We also like to talk to end users, especially if you have a system in place today. We like to understand what's working, maybe what's not. And again, think about opportunities, issues, pains or potential gains that the end users can see. As you go through all of these conversations, capturing it all in notes absolutely makes sense. You'll take pages and pages of notes. These can be tough interviews. Our experience is that it's better to have at least two people for each interview, at least two interviewers. You can have one person asking the question or one person taking notes, or they can swap back and forth. If there are two sets of notes, that's okay, you can merge the notes at the end. But they can be very stressful to sit there in an interview, especially with some of the executive, thinking of smart questions and scribbling notes at the same time. Okay, so the next piece of research, this is all about compliance, of course. We really need to understand from a records management, from a pure discipline of records management, what are the needs, what are the risks, and what are the gaps. Think about the major areas within your organization that require careful records control. What's happening today? What's going to be happening in the future? Think about other line of business systems that might be containing records or managing records. Oftentimes, SAP, for example, ends up as a records management solution as well because, say, application forms are stored in SAP. You have to think about the broader environment. And then finally, think about organizational maturity. Organizations aren't going to jump from being a relative newbie in the records management space to being really advanced. So you don't want to push further than the organization or faster than the organization can change. So the next piece of our research is listening labs. The development of the roadmap will ultimately tell us where, who, or what we need to focus on within the organization. So to some extent, the notion of listening labs can seem premature, but we can still solicit and gain a lot of insight using the philosophy of listening labs. This is really just an opportunity for us to see the end users in their natural habitat. It's kind of like going on a safari to watch tigers, perhaps. So it's really useful to observe how people are working today. If there's that existing solution, whether it's records management, whether it's document management, how is it working? How are people interacting with it? It's very, very valuable to literally sit down with somebody, stare over their shoulder, and see how they're looking at how they're interacting with the environment or with that solution. At this point, it's also worth noting that we try to understand people's physical environments. We want to look at their desks, at their working environments, and understand what's going on around them. First of all, the location. Are they in a mine? Are they working in a desk environment? Are they in a call center? Maybe they're at home, maybe they're on the bus. And then if they're in a work environment, or if they're in a cubicle environment or at their desk, it's worth looking at the physical environments they're sitting in. What are the post-it notes that are stuck around their desk? Do they have common reference articles that they're looking to or they're using continuously? There's a lot of valuable intelligence in that. The next piece of research is content inventory. There's a lot to be said about this. The content could be any sort of content, could be documents, of course it could be records, whether they be physical or electronic. It could be structured data or it could be unstructured data. Okay, so the final topic is measurement. In your research, think about how we might be able to measure the impact that we're having on the organization. For example, if we're considering supporting a specific business process, are there ways, can we find ways to measure if we're either expediting that business process or even better, driving better business outcomes? When we're thinking about this stuff, we always strive to get the measure as close to the business outcome as we possibly can. For example, measuring the number of page visits is it's potentially interesting, but it doesn't really tell us if we're impacting the organization in a positive manner. As you're exploring this area, it's valuable to think about what is established today, what reports or what measurement is based, regardless of whether or not it's in the electronic world, what measurement is based on that particular area today. Are there executive reports that are generated, for example? How might we be able to, or can we identify some proxy measures for some of those reports? Now we're going to talk about building the vision. The vision you can think about as what do we care about above all else? Like what's the real reason that we're doing all of this work? The thing to note about the research is that it generates a lot of stuff. There's all of the interview notes, there's all of the content inventory, there's the measurement stuff, and so on and so on. There's a lot in here. So the process of building the vision is about starting to sense make of all of these ideas and really boiling them down and identifying key themes. So as we get into this, I have to just sort of acknowledge Megan Armstrong and James Sloan, my colleagues within Habanero, for a lot of the work they've done in developing this vision and roadmap process. Megan has actually written some really lovely insights. You can find them on our website about this stuff. So please go in and check out those insights about the vision and roadmap process. Okay, so the next step here is to start to group stuff. Start to group your post-it notes. Don't worry too much about it. If, as you're going through this, you take each post-it one at a time and you sort of group it with the previous ones. If the grouping starts to break down, don't worry too much. Just rearrange that grouping to accommodate the post-its as they come. The grouping might be about, say, bigger themes, or simply you might be grouping them along similar ideas that were raised by different people through the interviews. The reason for that color coding is that it helps you to see when you're done that you've got an equal representation of ideas from all of your various stakeholders. So the next step here, and this is certainly more of an art than a science, is to review your groupings that you have, or the areas that you have identified, and extract these out into a couple of different concepts. It's useful to think about these concepts from the outset as you start to do the groupings, but you absolutely don't need to. So these two concepts that we're looking to work towards, one is the design principles, and the other one is what we call big ideas. So the design principles, these are themes that are important to the overall success of the project. Sort of guiding principles, if you like, that you want to work through or that you want to adhere to through the process. Typically, I find these are something like a why. Well, we're going to do this because of X, Y, Z. Or it could be a how. When we're going to do this, this is how we're going to approach it. It's useful to think about these in terms of them being business objectives rather than necessarily a goal. Inherently, objectives are more of a journey than necessarily this notion of a destination. As you're trying to capture these things, these design principles, keep them pithy and keep them sticky. It really helps to understand them, remember them, and ultimately communicate them. Some examples of some nice design principles within a records management project might be, say, keep it user-focused. Might be business process oriented, or you might have some other objectives that show up, like connecting the company or even engaging employees. Try to get specific. Think of this as a way of focusing the project and the team on the business outcomes that are the priorities within your organization. The second one, big ideas. These are really the what of the solution. As with the design principles, they should be captured as solution outcomes, or potentially items that will result in specific outcomes. These will relate individually to specific pieces of value, maybe to the employee, to the department, to the business, or to the records manager. Be a little bit careful about that latter one, because remember, we're trying to focus on the end users, not the records managers. Okay, so we could just run through a really simple example of how this really comes to life. So as you go through, you'll start to collect a series of post-it notes. You'll go through your interviews, you'll capture your notes, and you'll transcribe these notes onto multiple post-it notes. This is typically what you'll see on the post-it notes. It could be really just quotes. No one knows what's going on with it, the solution. I always find that I have to email attachments to contractors. I like paper. It's dying, doesn't seem to be working for me anymore. It's good, but I have to remember to take stuff with me on the road. And so on and so on. You'll find that you have lots of different commentary, seemingly all disconnected. So on and so on. Okay then, so once you've got all of these post-it notes written out, you can start to group them. It's a little hard to show this within PowerPoint, so I've cheated a little bit, or actually cheated a lot, and organized the post-it notes ahead of time. In reality, of course, you'll find that as you take them off your stack of post-it notes, they're not going to come out organized like we see here. So once you have organized them, though, what you'll want to do is start to figure out a title or a theme for each collection. So here we have content is all discoverable, the platform is accessible, keep on evolving, for example, and need records management infrastructure. The ones on the far right here are sort of miscellaneous ones. They don't really quite fit. It's okay, you won't necessarily be able to group everything. Some ideas will just not really sit in your taxonomy here. So don't forget, the design principles are more about the why or the how, whereas the big ideas are more oriented towards the what. So what we're looking at here are really more of the design principles. These are those sort of objectives. Platform is accessible, content is all discoverable, and so on. Okay, so now we're going to talk about developing the roadmap itself. Really all we've got is a ton of research. We've used a lot of sticky notes, and we've got a notion of the vision itself. Now we need to pull this into the roadmap. Where are we going to start? What do we do next? And so on and so on. So the way that this works is you start to build out a big matrix. So before we jump into this, it's worth just talking about who's going to do this. Who does any of these steps, really? We discussed at the start that one of the goals for the vision and roadmap process is alignment. And it turns out that creation of the roadmap itself is a really great opportunity for driving further alignment. So instead of creating the roadmap yourself and then presenting it to your stakeholders with a big sort of a fanfare, it's a really great opportunity for you to help them create the roadmap itself. So gather all of your stakeholders in a room and walk through this process with them. Now, you will find that this may sort of out or surface organizational biases or potentially politics. You need to be prepared for that. But don't be afraid of having meaningful conversations about the priorities. You also will likely see sort of proxy wars spring up that are ostensibly about ordering the big ideas, for example, but are really rooted in the difference in a difference of opinion about company strategies. So in this sense, your role here really is as a facilitator. You're not the final say. You're not the guy who's managing the conversation, but really you're just there to engage your stakeholders and keep the conversation rolling forwards. Okay, so really as we begin to lay this out, it's really, like I say, it's a big matrix. So find a big wall or a big whiteboard. And what we find is it's really useful to use those sticky paper sheets. You can write comments on those paper sheets and move them around, or you can use sticky notes and again move them around. So the first thing to do is to map out the matrix, as you can see here. So the big ideas will be along the top. These are going to be the column headings. You can see them right here. And then down the left-hand side, we're going to have another set of headings that are the row titles. Because we're creating user-friendly records management, the first row title is going to be value to the employee. Then the next one is value to the business, design principles, and so on and so forth. The reason for including the design principles here is that all we're looking to do is understand whether or not a big idea is supporting that design principle or not supporting that design principle. It doesn't necessarily matter if all of those big ideas don't support every single design principle. Really, we're just trying to get a sense of how prevalent or how related each design principle is to the big ideas, to make sure that they're all meaningful and all relevant. At this point in the process, you can also decide to add in other ideas or thoughts that you want to capture for each big idea. You can see here we have on the left-hand side requirements for success. You could also have technical considerations, technical interdependencies. We talked about measurement previously. You might choose that, you might suggest that the final row for each of the big ideas is a bunch of measures. Hey, if we measure this, this, and this for each big idea, then we'll be able to understand if we're being successful. So once you have your matrix laid out, you can start to fill in the content inside the matrix. Again, sticky notes work really well here so that you can move stuff around. You will find that this is an iterative process. What we found works really well is if you capture these notes in the first person, especially the value to the employee or value to the business. For example, a post-it note might say, I'm able to get my job done faster and more consistently. Apparently the system we use automatically makes the right documents into records when we're done. It's a really nice way of bringing the system to life. Okay, so this is actually what it looks like. You can see here we have the big ideas. These are the green post-it notes along the top. We have the red post-its down the left-hand side. These are the row titles, value to the employee, value to the business, and so on. And then right in the middle here, the yellow post-its with the black writing on are the narrative for each of the big ideas. So just to drill in a little bit further here, this is an example, sort of a zoomed-in version of a roadmap. So here we have the big ideas along the top, sharing information with partners and contractors, for example. And the second one is one location for all invoices, contracts, and master services agreements. Down the left-hand side, we have value to the employee, value to the business, and then compliance. And then all we do simply is we start to fill out the narrative that associates each big idea to the row titles. So I won't read through these. You can understand, start to get a good idea of how this works. Really, there's quite a bit of work in here. You want to really use this narrative to bring the big idea to life. Okay, so one other thing that we want to cover off just before we get to the end here is the ordering. So of course, we're building a roadmap here. The ordering of things is really an important piece. So how do you decide which one goes first, or really who gets to go first as you flesh out these big ideas? So you can base your prioritization on any number of things, really. You could base it on strategy. What's most important to the organization? What are the big things that we want to be doing this year, next year, and so on and so forth? You might base it on stakeholders. Who are the people in the organization that we want to support? Are there a particular collection of stakeholders that, for whatever reason, we want to prioritize support for? You could base that ordering on business value. Okay, well, where are the big areas of value that we can deliver back into the business? Maybe sort of the good old low-hanging fruit, for example. You'll probably find there are some dependencies as you flesh out your roadmap. We have to do this activity first before we can do that, especially when you get into the technology side of things. And then finally, you'll probably find that there are just some natural priorities that surface for any number of other reasons. You just have to get it done. A commitment has been made, somebody's bonus is tied to that commitment, whatever. Any of these things can happen. Don't resist it, just go with it. Okay, so in addition to figuring out the order, and we've talked about those various mechanisms for prioritizing things, you have to also figure out how you're going to execute each of these big ideas. The ideas are seldom sort of all or nothing, on or off. You can maybe start small, go big, build proof of concepts, build pilots, and so on and so forth. We really like this cupcake analogy. It's from a fellow by the name of Brandon. He works at Adaptive Path. You can access a very good description of this at this URL. Briefly, the way that it works is that it goes along the lines that when you're building a regular cake, you bake the sponge layers first, then you add in the delicious filling, and then finally you impress everyone with some killer icing and some decorations. Cake, filling, icing. This is cool. But it's not really all that palatable until the end of the process. Up to that point, all you've really got is some sponge slabs, and frankly, it's not all that exciting. Consider a cupcake, however. It's very different. Build a small cupcake, it's quick and it's easy. It's complete, it's tasty, and people want it. Once you've built your cupcake, you can then go on to build another cupcake, or even a bigger cake. This is a sort of a light-hearted example, but the notion of a cupcake that is continuously complete is really worth thinking about as you build out your roadmap. Okay, so finally, you have your matrix fleshed out and ordered based on whatever ordering idea or ideas make sense. You can consider the notion of the cupcake to produce something small and engaging for your stakeholders and go from there. So at this point, you still probably have a bunch of sticky notes on the wall, and eventually, regardless of how good it looks, somebody's going to need that space. So what we do typically is when we're working with our clients, we build these into long, actually really long roadmaps. Sometimes they end up being 3 feet high and 14 feet long. So we actually have a template that you can use for these roadmaps, and we're happy to share that with you. It's a sort of a bit of a quick start really for these roadmaps. So if you're interested in that template, email me and I'll send it to you directly. So this is an example of one of our roadmaps, just to drill in a little bit further. This is a fictitious one. You can see that it's much more business oriented than technology oriented. The design principle are really business objectives. SEA is people, SEA is a great place to work. Whereas those big ideas along the top are more about specific ideas that you can execute on. This is the what. In that alignment with the principles row there, you can see at a glance which design principles are supported by each big idea. So one thing to note, this should be a really nicely finished deliverable. The value of building this out and spending a bit of time on the look and feel of the whole thing is that it implicitly conveys that lots of work, care, and attention has gone into producing this roadmap. And that really elevates it in people's minds. But be mindful of one thing. Don't treat it as sacrosanct. This is a living and breathing document. When you're working with these deliverables with your stakeholders, don't be afraid to scribble out bits of the roadmap, even chop it up if you need to in order to rearrange it. Really, it's a tool around organizing your records management initiative. So I'll pause for a moment just to give you a chance to look at this. Okay, so we're at the end of today's journey. I'm going to briefly summarize what we've discussed, and then we're going to jump into some questions and answers. So firstly, we talked about the research activities. Start with research. There's a bunch of different activities. You don't need to do all of these activities. These are typically the activities that we undertake within Habanero. Then you have to collate all of those ideas and all of the research and start to develop themes and groupings. Again, you want to be developing groupings of design principles and then these big ideas. And then finally build the roadmap itself. First on a whiteboard or a wall, and then build it into a really great looking document. Hit us up for a template if you need one. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's session. I hope it was valuable. We have a few minutes left for questions, and so I will turn it over to Spencer to see if we have any questions.